Geneva Overholser, the director of the Journalism School. Welcome to the Directors Forum. Our speaker is on his way over from Marshall, but I thought we would begin because we have with us our colleague Casey Cole, who brought Michael Brown to LA and who had him as part of her Sunday evening Categorically Not. Many of you know about these wonderful Categorically Not programs in which Casey brings together people of various disciplines. I believe this one was Michael Brown's, whom you'll be hearing a lot about, and our own Mark Cooper, and a ballerina choreographer, which was the typical combo of unexpected folks. So this program is particularly cast as a part of our economic literacy and entrepreneurship initiative. As you know, the Journalism Directors Forums are usually focused fairly precisely on journalism and new media. Michael Brown is past chairman of the NASDAQ Stock Market Board of Directors, not our typical Journalism Directors Forum guest, a past governor of the National Association of Securities Dealers, and past CFO of Microsoft, where he was responsible for the company's worldwide information technology, manufacturing operations, finance, and business development organizations. So he is indeed an unusual Directors Forum guest, and he's going to be talking to us when he arrives about what's really wrong with the economy and why journalists missed it. But given his background, I'm hopeful that we can also, during our Q&A session, have a chance to really kind of query him about the future of journalism and its economic support and that kind of thing. So
yeah, that he might not be so great.
It'll be interesting to hear what he has to say.
I think
this is Casey Cole. By the way, we welcome some of our prospective students. This is one of my colleagues, Casey Cole, who's a professor here and a distinguished science writer whose wonderful new book just got a terrific review in the New York Review of Books.
Thank you. Well, I will say, I do like to tell the Mike Brown story just because to me it's an example of how interesting life gets. You just never know what's going to happen. Who knew that I would be hanging out with such a person? But one of the first letters I got here was from Zoe Vanna Pomerose, who would be here from the Marshall School of Business here, with this Thog's Guide to Quantum Economics. A book that is about a 50,000-year-old family of mastodon hunters who invent arithmetic, etc. I'm just giving is Mike here?
Yes.
Yeah, so I barely even get to give my...
Oh, go ahead. Mike can listen to your...
I know nothing about accounting or business or anything, but I started reading this book and I realized, I really don't understand anything. And physics, biology, accounting, I also, of course, bring in dance and theater and everything. All of these things are so connected. So it just turned out that Mike was a fan of one of my books, and that's how we met. So you just never know what is going to happen in life. And one of the things they're doing now is putting together a kind of Manhattan Project for the economy, because it is in bigger trouble than you think, which I think Mike will tell you about. A matter of really going back to basics, not unlike journalism. When we had Mark Cooper, and you talk at Categorically Not, talking about the subject of space, and one of the things that really struck me is that one of the problems that's really made a big problem for the economy and the markets and journalism is the incredible speeding up of space, of time, rather. Construction of space, but speeding up of time, things happening almost on a scale that's faster than our brains can process. So I'm not going to talk anymore. But these are some of our faculty and students. We have prospective students and scholarship students, and
cool.
People will dribble in as they do.
Okay.
So, do you want food?
I can get you one now. Turkey, roast beef, tuna.
Turkey's
veggie.
fine.
Okay.
You want me to eat or talk?
Well, no, you talk.
We'll talk. I'll reserve you a lunch.
You want me to talk now?
Yeah, we've given you your introduction.
Yeah. Are you wired?
Can I sit down, or do I have to stand up?
You can do whatever you want.
All right. Casey asked me to talk about basically the 3 W's. The first one, dealing with the financial crisis, is like, hey, what happened? So the first one's a what. The short answer is the addicts took over the asylum, but I'll come back and add color to that. Second question was, where were the economists? Short answer is they live in a separate realm that's not here in space-time or even momentum energy with us by their own insistence and definition, so they were absent. We'll come back and touch on that. And the third question was, what about the journalists? To what extent did they get it and what did they miss? And the answer to that is they got almost all the headlines, but they didn't connect a lot of the dots. So there's the short answers to the three big questions. Let me add color to what happened. So I'm just going to mention six things. We had a depression here in 1929 that most everyone in here read about as some form of history and wasn't there for. And following that depression, we put in place some safeguards which were based on the principle of separation of concerns, and we put those in place for financial institutions. And so as a matter of law, insurance companies could only be insurance companies, commercial banks could only be those, and investment banks could only do investment banking, and there the twain should meet. In our wisdom, as time wore on, under the story, which I will explain to you in a minute, we disassembled all of that post-depression regulation in the name of modern progress and the internet. At the time of the Great Depression in 1929, the total debt, government, consumer, and everything as a percentage of GDP was 3.5 to 1. After the Depression, we were a little more frugal in our ways, and that ratio dropped to 1.6. It trickled along like that for a decade or two and began to climb. And when the wheels came off the market, we had just passed the prior extreme in our history as a nation of about 3.6. Other countries that you may have read about have had similar ratios. The other guy that high was Iceland, which tipped. And the other guys out there right now that are about that same rate are Greece, which is shaky. And we solved our problem by printing up a bunch more and raising our number in the name of saving the economy. And that's where we sit. Interestingly, if you look at Rome, I'm naming empires that fell, Spain, Holland, and England, on an almost identical pattern, and that was present there. So there was, all this extra borrowing had a little bit to do with it. The second thing that happened is if you look back only 20 years to maybe 1950 or something like that, the economy consisted in terms of profits about 15% of it was in the finance sector, and about 45% of it was in manufacturing, heavy industry, the rest was services. At the time the wheels came off the cart, the finance and manufacturing sectors had exactly reversed. 40 to 45% of the profits were being earned in the finance sector, and the much smaller number in manufacturing. So the view of economic things became more short-term, because the way a manufacturing guy thinks is, hey man, you know, build a plant, make some stuff, you know, slow down here, we'll do this, take a year or two, build a plant, then we're going to do it, then we're going to blow up, you know. These are long cycle times, and the way the Wall Street guys think is like a bond trader, like give me the money, give me all the money, give it to me now, faster is better, and it's way better if you're them, because a lot of times when they cycle it, they get to charge a fee. So the whole outlook of things went incredibly short-term, and that was the investment environment that the firms faced. The next thing that happened is something changed very fundamentally, and that's the internet did come along. And things could go a lot faster, and when we took apart the depression safeguards, we needed a story for why that made sense in the new age of the internet. And here's the story that was marketed and managed and delivered to you guys in journalism, and here's the story that a lot of you bought. We don't need these separate containers anymore to keep everything orderly, because we have modern risk management tools. And if you don't believe it, it's all based on the options pricing model, and they already got the Nobel Prize for it. So we have the Nobel Prize good housekeeping stamp of approval on modern financial risk management. And here's the essence of it. If you can accept this one simple premise, you will love this. Volatility equals value. You may go, what? This is the basis of it. How does this work? So you take $10 stock and you trade it real fast, hooked up to the internet, so it can go up and down, and it has some volatility, so pick a number, 10%. So it goes up and down once a day, that's how much? $1, huh? Once an hour, 6. Once a minute, 360. Once a second, once a millisecond, do the math, that's $21 million a day in potential value of a $10 stock by trying to buy high and sell, buy low and sell high in the volatility. That's a very big tail for a $10 dog. That's every day, every trading day, 260 days. So this volatility is called alpha. And here's why a better solution to the crisis would have been to write the bad debts off and put the guys in rehab, because Wall Street became alcoholics, is what they did. And you can imagine a guy goes down, we don't have real specialized treatment centers for alcoholics, so you got to go to AA. So you don't go down to the meeting, you're sitting there in a room with the guys, and the first thing you do is to say, I'm an alcoholic. Stands up, guys, what's your drug? No, I'm alcoholic. Says, me too, I'm methamphetamine. Wall Street banker goes, I'm addicted to alpha. Some of the guys meet down there might not know what alpha is. They go, hey, what's this alpha stuff? Oh, big drug, man. Is it a street drug? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's a street drug. You get it right on the street, You getting any help for this? No, it's legal. You don't even have to sneak it in from, another country. We make it right here on Wall Street. That's perfectly legal. So Wall Street went crazy over this, all under the rubric that this modern risk management and our fancy mathematics for this system were going to protect us. And that story didn't work. So the markets began to trade on trading, and you got some funny things that happened. So you got all these exotics and derivatives. Why do those happen? Well, if you're in the business of trading and half the profits in the country are being earned there, and you run out of stuff to trade. It takes longer to make a company. You're not just getting a zillion new companies to trade every day, because it takes 10 years sometimes or more to do that. And now we got all these trading desks. They need work to do, so we make up some other stuff. Trade contracts. Try this, try that, try the next thing, try this thing. How about a mortgage-backed security? Trade, more. Pick a country that let its major economy run on an addictive drug, and how does it look to live there? Think of examples. Here's one, Afghanistan. They do opium. Here's another one, Mexico. They're doing heroin. Here's another one, Colombia. Economies where the major product is based on an addiction are not maybe necessarily the happiest place to do art, dance, think reflective thoughts, watch the sunset. It's crazy. That's what happened to us. So was there any warning? Yeah, there was. In the last 20 years, there was a succession of international crises, at least 18. 3 countries went through the ringer twice. We were having them almost once a year for 20 years that were significant enough that you guys in journalism were willing to call them a crisis. Everyone was explained slightly differently. Everyone had access to modern risk management tools. Everyone was buying into this. We'll be protected by the golden hand. And time after time, they were called crisis. Argentina was in twice. Mexico was in twice. And it got to the step, one of the most famous traders on Wall Street was a young kid who figured out actually that it turned out that you could count the number of units of New Zealand dollars that were possible to be in circulation at any one point in time. And he managed to trick some guys into writing complex contracts on these, so that for the contracts to settle would require about 3 times the total amount of New Zealand currency as existed in New Zealand. And when this thing started to come down, the central banks and stuff were like, whoa, and the guys are going, you want to negotiate? Okay, we admit, you can't do the trade. You guys want to negotiate? So here's a 26-year-old kid who's a hero to the traders on Wall Street doing high fives about taking down a country. Great. Perfect picture. That's how we got a crisis. Where were the economists, and how did they all miss it? The general perception is that they all missed it. That's not fair. There's 112,000 professional practicing economists in the world, and I read a study that claims that 12 didn't. So they didn't all miss it. But why is it, I think, easy? Well, I'll come to that when I come to journalism. One of them was my pal, Rubini, who the New York Times dubbed Dr. Doom. But one of the main reasons I think that they missed it is that they don't believe that they necessarily operate in the same realm that we do. In 1970, when he received the Nobel Prize, Paul Samuelson, one of our best and most famous and most revered economists, explained he saw no reason whatsoever why the laws of physics and thermodynamics should apply in the separate realm, nice word, huh? Realm of economics. Geez, Paul, where is this realm? I mean, where are we here? We're not down here on the round Earth where the rest of us live. We're not in the biosphere. It can't be on a planet somewhere else. Physicists tell us those are all in space-time. Where is it? Momentum energy? Somewhere else? So this has been convenient, however, if your job as an economist is essentially to be a high priest of the ruling financial class. Because it's important not to be empirically accountable. This way you can do whatever you want, and all you have to do is just really spin a good story. And the guys doing this were masters at it. Do you ever listen to Greenspan? What did he say? I have no idea, but everybody knows he's brilliant. The Wizard of Wall Street. We have, his nicknames. Wizard. How about an accountable guy? How about accountability? So this was their place, and they're quite resistant to the idea that they should be accountable to results. I told a story in one of the other classes when I was chairman of NASDAQ. We actually built a model that pretty much predicted the dot-com bomb using actual real science, and we showed it to these guys. I showed it to Greenspan. I testified about it in Congress. I showed it to the SEC, and they went, everybody knows that economic models we don't expect them to be predictive. What are you thinking? We have years of evidence that economic models are not predictive. The economy is what it is, man. It could go up, it could go down, it could crash and stuff. We have no control over this. All the professionals tell us it's out of control. They said, look, those are really different models. Those are top-down, old-fashioned differential equation models. This is a model that starts with the causal microstructure of a simple system called the market. It's nice and contained. We think we can model it pretty well, and it says there's going to be a disaster. Now it'll be wrong. Put it in the bottom drawer. So I haven't been receptive enough to science. So the short story of why the economists mostly missed it, they don't live here. They operate in a separate realm of their own devising and do not hold themselves accountable to empirical results. So where were the journalists? I hadn't really thought so much about journalism until you guys invited me down here, and so I don't really know whether I know what I'm talking about or not, because I'm not a journalist far from it. But I do think they did a lot better than the economists. They did chronicle the crises. Besides, in addition to the international ones that might have tipped us off, let's see, how about the crises here at home? We had the savings and loan crisis. You guys nailed it. Crisis! Crisis! Wake up, guys. Black Monday came next. Crisis! You did great on the headlines. Long-term capital management came next. We bailed them out. Another crisis. You missed one story on that. The guys running long-term capital management that drove off a cliff and had to be bailed out along with the banks by the government were the guys that got the Nobel Prize for the formula at the basis of the modern risk management theory. And that should have been a great story, and that story didn't get very well told. But it would have been rude. Hey, by the way, how come you guys are giving it out? I go interview the Nobel Committee. I'd just like to know, how come you guys can give a prize like this in this field to these guys who use this to go broke and nearly bring down the economy? Help me out. But it would have been a fun interview, huh? You like rude journalism. So, and then this last time around. So you good calling out the crises. Supposing you tried to connect the dots between, take all the international crises, which were mostly involved some form of central banking and some form of money printing machinery, screwing around with the local currency and doing the normal inflation talk and all the rest of that stuff. Did the same thing go wrong every place, or was it totally different? Okay, if you read the coverage of these, and I went back a little bit and looked just to kind of see what it looked like, it sounded, most of it was what was different about Mexico when it blew up versus Argentina when it blew up. The problem is that's not the interesting question. The interesting question was, what was the same about these things that keep blowing up in succession over and over and over again? Those are hard dots to connect, and the job's made harder because you go, okay, there's a lot of moving parts in here, mechanical stuff, numbers I hadn't heard of, inflation, GDP, all this complicated stuff. Who can I talk to? I better get an expert. Who are the experts? The economists. Where are the economists? In a separate realm. So that's, at least you can turn in an expense report. Where are you going? I have to make a trip to a separate realm to talk to an economist. It's a long way. It's expensive there. You know, I'll need to drink good wine, you know. So stand by. This is an expensive investigation with an economist. And then you got a blurry answer. So, you know, I wouldn't sit around going, we should have connected the dots better, but you might think going forward about bringing a little more professional skepticism. All great fictions are based on the willing suspension of disbelief. And I think in journalism, if you are willing to suspend common sense, you will aid and abet great fiction. But if you say to yourself, I don't care how fancy you are, this makes no sense, I'm still on this, get out your notebook, do your investigative stuff, and you'll get there. Another thing I think you'll notice about this, and I'll stop and we can take questions. Just maybe about two more. Is at least it seemed to me coming into the crisis. So it probably got predicted in different ways. For example, in certain limited scientific circles consisting of 26 guys, they believe I predicted it because a couple months before it happened, I put on a skit in a camp predicting it. And so those 26 guys go, oh, Brownie was right on this. He nailed it, you know. But wasn't like widely available predictive credentials. But a lot of guys screaming loudly were writing books versus showing up in the normal print press. So what are examples? There's a book by a guy named Bookstaver called The Demon of Our Own Design. This was a guy who'd been a risk manager on Wall Street. He basically wrote a book that said, guys, this is going to happen. It happened. This one, the last one hadn't happened yet, but he'd been there for long-term capital management. He'd been there for the dot-com bomb. He said it's going to happen again and again and again. I don't know exactly where, but this will happen. I'm here to tell you. I lived it. I worked in it for 25 years. Heads up. The book was fabulous. And there's another great book, and you know, there's probably 10 or 12 of this, but I'll just mention one other example. It was by a guy named Nicholas Taleb called The Black Swan. Some of you may have read that. He went, look, this risk stuff, you can't use statistical arithmetic for uncertainties. For massively open systems that have major uncertainties in them, you are going to have major dislocations. And you know, you have to be careful about that kind of stuff. Sure, in a contained system, you can do good arithmetic. Take a gambling casino. Do they know their odds? Absolutely. Does arithmetic work? Perfectly. What happens if there's an earthquake? Oops. Or a mudslide? Oops. Or the gambling casino happened to be in Brazil, right by the epicenter, or worse, Haiti. You know, those are uncertainties. And not all of this stuff is susceptible to arithmetic. And the worst thing about the arithmetic is the physicists know it. So if you actually go to them and say, hey, guys, let's talk arithmetic. So if you want to have this conversation, leave yourself, you know, a little longer than 5 minutes or something. So they go, well, no, we don't do that differential equations. You know, the old calculus you did in those square boxes. We got to have a twisty, curvy, attorney kind of thing. We do space where we measure curvature, and this is what we've had to do. You know, it took us 100 years to develop it. It's very cool. It's called Hilbert math. You know, so say, what are you thinking there about risk and uncertainty? Well, you know, you can measure risk and you can't measure uncertainty. We can do it. The Hilbert space gives you an exact answer. The answer goes like this. If you ask it a bad question, it goes 0. Try again. 0. Try a good question. Probability. That's essentially how it works mechanically. So they actually have some common sense about this stuff, which has been totally and conspicuously absent in finance and economics. So I talked about headlines. I'm going to tell you something a little bit different about the government agencies and the economists and the guys running the businesses. Some of the bigger businesses were probably the most adaptive critters in the face of the onslaught from the financial collapse. You might have noticed as watching them. They were pretty quick. They cut the good ones. They cut their head count back down. They got themselves straight on their financial feet. They were very careful, very responsive, and some of the, as we come out of the dip, and it's just a dip because we're still in trouble, you know, they were some of the first to emerge. Why is this? Because I think Andy Grove probably said it best when he wrote his book about Intel. He said, only the paranoid survive. These guys are massively paranoid, and the good ones run on this principle. You got bad news, bring it here now, immediately, and I'll give you special bonus, but I want the bad news first. You got great news, everything's groovy, no problema, we want to have a celebration, fine, but let's do that once a quarter for 2 hours, because the rest of the time we're focused on what's wrong, not what's right, what could break, not what's wonderful. Well, the government doesn't work that way. They go, you know, we're here, everything's great that we're doing. If you have the other guys, everything will be totally wrong that they're doing, and here's the money to pay you for voting for us. Whoops, it was your money? I'm giving you your money to vote for me? No, I took it away from you. So you got to look at what are the people you're covering when they look to you like paranoid types or like denial types. The addicts are going to tell you, oh, it's great, oh, trust me, you know, believe me, yeah. You know, if the guy's going, no, I'm worried about it. Yeah, I'm worried about that too. Oh, yep, worried. And you guys can tell the difference. You know, people show whether they're worried about bad stuff or in denial. And so let me just finish with this. I think you're have a very special opportunity here by being here with KC and being in journalism in KC, because the one guiding principle that you can take in all of this, if you want what you're doing to be closer to the truth than otherwise, is to keep in mind the scientific method, because this has really worked pretty well. This is a method that's kind of a trial by error thing. This is a method that goes, here's an idea that might work. We tried it. Oops, wrong idea. Oh, it did work. Good idea. Maybe we can fix the idea a little bit more. Oops, didn't work. Step back, step forward, step back, step forward. But it's always based on this trial and error thing. And significant knowledge gets built up this way. You have progress. And if you can stick closer to the scientific method when you're thinking about whether you're there with the facts or not, you will, I think, end up with more fact-based journalism, and over time connect more dots.
That's what Casey's trying to teach us all the time.
Yeah, can I connect
Oh, that's it.
I want to connect a few dots just to
Yeah.
bring everybody in. For one thing, the great breakthrough in string theory in 1985 was made at camp by John Schwartz, and didn't come out until 5 years later. So camp is actually a really good place for things to happen, like Dawes Camp. But one of the things I always tell my students in writing about science, but not just science, is this idea of using your common sense. Dare to be stupid. Don't be fooled because somebody won a Nobel Prize or was published in a peer-reviewed journal or a lot of things. If it doesn't make sense, chances are follow that, because chances are you're probably right about that. Another thing I wanted to mention that sort of underlies everything you're doing is that everything is connected, and which is part of the problem the economists got into. In science, in the last 50 years, but certainly more recently in the last 10 or 20. It's all about understanding complex systems and uncertain systems and how to deal with that. And the tools are there, but you have to look outside exactly where you're looking. And most great innovations and discoveries are made by people who borrow from and look to other fields. So having said that, I think there are many, many lessons that apply to all realms of journalism that just are not covering the economy of business.
Great, well, thank you both. Let's open the floor to questions or comments.
Anybody wants
I'm
to talk about
resisting
it?
saying you did a heck of a job, Brownie.
What? You resisting?
I did, but I didn't resist.
Tell me the bad news. Let's forget the good news.
So, questions, comments? Yes.
For a journalist researching something as huge as like an economic meltdown, where do you start? I mean, do you try to contact people who run companies? I mean, it's such a big field and there's a lot of secrets. So where do you start?
Give me just a little context of what you're.
So,
you want to explain the whole thing?
Well, there are some areas in the economic crisis that happened here that weren't explored very well, and nobody really came up with an answer why it happened. I mean, who are these journalists going to? Are they going to CEOs? Are they going to economists who work at universities? I mean, who's credible, I guess, is my question.
If you look back on who was getting it before it happened, there was a small list of economists. There was a longer list of securities analysts who followed the banks, believe it or not, which collapsed, who were getting more and more skeptical with each passing day about whether the banks were sustainable the way they were behaving. So you can start with those guys. In general, it's interesting to start with who said it was going to happen before it actually happened and see if what they say makes any sense. But you have to be careful about the toilet paper joke when you listen to that. I don't know if you know this joke. You're riding along on a train through Montana, and you notice out on the back of the train there's a guy sitting there carefully taking off one tab of toilet paper and throwing it up into the air. And you say, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "I'm keeping away the elephants." He said, "Elephants? Here in Montana?" He goes, "That's right, it works. You see any elephants?" So sometimes some of these people can just be right. They happen to be right for reasons that defy your common sense. So don't suspend your common sense, but a good place to start is with some of the guys that got it right. And usually early in the game they would love to talk because everybody's been ignoring them. "Oh, you think you got this right. I'm a journalist. You want to talk?" Pretty soon you'll be going. Because they'll usually go on forever. So that's a good place to start. I wish I could tell you that science was more equipped to reply on the economics front than it is, but we're trying to work on that, and maybe make a little progress. Maybe we can't. We'll see how we do.
I'm going to jump in here with something that really occurred to me while you were talking about the sort of the period of addiction and just making everything turn over more and more quickly, and you run out of stuff to trade because nobody's manufacturing anymore. You don't have the long-term thing. I got to tell you, that really rings very ominous bells for us in the journalism world, where so many people are churning out stuff, but they're more and more just chewing over less and less information. In other words, remember when Michael Powell was talking when he was chairing FCC about there's no need for us to worry about outlets. Why the number of outlets is proliferating every hour, about an hour practically. And that was true, but the number of inputs was not. So that to me is ominously analogous. I wonder.
Well, I'll give you two thoughts on information. One's a geek thought from somebody that spent their life in the information business. So you guys might not notice there's this fabulous guy named Ralph Landauer, another physicist, who was at IBM, and he's famous for a principle called Landauer erasure, which was sort of poo-pooed when he first raised the possibility, and is increasingly well accepted, particularly in the information technology space, where, by the way, a lot of software writing and network work is actually done by physicists. We hire as many of them as probably any other field. And the erasure principle goes, if in a big space out there with a bunch of bits flying around, if you assemble some group of them as quote unquote information, so there's a stack here, bits, data, information, and then there's probably a grading like relevant information, nonsense information. But if you assemble something as information, then that same amount of information is lost somewhere else in the system. Unless you change the volume of bits. As long as the bits are conserved, new information, new configurations of them is a trade-off. So you have there's some sort of trade-off things in this thing, you know, of what's relevant information. And then here's the story for journalism. The regulation of the markets by the Securities and Exchange Commission is done under an instruction from Congress written in 1975 that reads more or less approximately as follows. Okay, lads, I put that in to lighten it, but it didn't read that way. But your job is to facilitate the establishment of a national market system based on the fundamental principle of transparency of information. Very nice. Same way that information was important at the beginning of the Republic, and the same way that journalism played a huge role in that. And with the main idea being that when we talk about information, we're talking about information that's interesting to people versus, you know, things that might be exciting for a lizard or some other way of communicating with a whale where you'd have to speak or something, but where it's all the same kind of critter. So now put the computers in the mix, and if you look at trading, and as I mentioned, some of these huge numbers in foreign currency markets, for example, every single day trade 15 times the volume of the world's GDP that day, 15 times as much trading on trading as any kind of other economic activity going on. They do this with computers, and the computers, as I mentioned, launch 1,000 trades a millisecond, and they are getting information out of the system in millisecond latencies. So what is transparency of information when half the operative agents in this thing are these little bitty algorithms? They aren't even like Hal. When they wrote Space Odyssey, at least Hal came in a box. You know, at least you could hurt his feelings. At least you could sit down and talk to him. He might be a hell of a lot smarter than you, and maybe he could guide a rocket, you know, and you were better at a poem. But we had this anthropomorphic idea that eventually the computers were going to think we were so wonderful. They were going to be just like us. These are little algorithms. They're like viruses that process information on frequencies we can't operate on. You can't fire synapse in this speed of time. So what are the regulators about the markets say, hey, we have these quality. This was our job. We take our job seriously. We have these quality metrics. Here's one job: transparency of information. We do a great job on this. There's 6,000 things we've done. We beat people that don't give the right information in here. Everything's perfect. We enforce this. We've been locking people up, you know, that didn't do it. And here's what we do. We do it every quarter, you know, right on schedule. All these firms say all this stuff. And if anything unusual happens, we're faster than a quarter. If they have a special event, they file an 8K. We're all over this. And then we also believe in free and open competition in the markets. And we're totally open to this, and that's why we embrace all the viruses trading in millisecond time latencies based on information that's not available. They never ask the question, who can use it?
Well, I think that's what, just to maybe push you on what Geneva was saying, that a lot of what you write about is a separation of the economy from actual substance. Yeah. I have something you want, you have something I want, and we got completely away from that. In journalism, in a way, that's also becoming the problem, is there's not enough substance or content or ways to pay for it to feed this incredibly rapid processing machine. So transparency, which is there in a way, but there's so much information that becomes noise. So in a sense, you don't have transparency. So what do we do?
I don't know what you do, but I'm old-fashioned about having some institutions. I think the internet's great, and I think the internet's dangerous in certain ways. And Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious, we talk about transparency in information, but it seems to me that there's so many people buying stocks, buying mutual funds particularly, money just pouring in, where they're disregarding information. They buy a fund without knowledge of what stocks the fund owns, paying attention only to one statistic, the daily share return, the quarterly return. So there's kind of no real judgment going on. And yet the market just reproduces with this constant flood of money coming in without much in the way of knowledgeable investment occurring. And I'm not sure what you do about people just, pouring money into something that they're essentially ignorant about.
It's a hard problem because the fundamental thing that the market does is allow two different views to be taken of the same transaction over different timescales. So if you're the company that sold some stock and got some capital, you got permanent capital, so you can go do your long time cycle thing. And this is very good because we need some long time cycle stuff. That's how we get energy, that's how we have housing, that's how we have transportation, that's how we eat food, that's how we get clothes, that's all long cycle stuff. And at the same time, it has the advantage that people putting it up can get in and out faster than those cycles. So that's okay. But how many times do they have to get in and out? Particularly the same three guys, like the big banks, in order for the market to serve its balanced purpose. And how much craziness, over on the trading side is the right amount of craziness before the thing gets out of balance. Well, one indication would be 18 international crises and 5 domestic ones in 20 years, in 2 decades. You might go, this could be evidence that something's not quite right. So let's not emphasize every single way in which Mexico was different from Argentina. Let's talk about what's going on the same each place.
Can I translate your institution remark because they don't have the feedback from. So I think part of this was in response to Mark Cooper talking about how great it was, and it is that information is open, that anybody can be a blogger and be a success, that there's that in a way there's no need for the institutions of journalism. That's a slight exaggeration, but
So for our prospective students, Mark Cooper is head of our Annenberg institutes.
yeah, it does a good job. But in a way, you were reacting to.
Nice. Something like the New York Times institutions.
Yeah, we heard a talk the other night that journalism as we know it is dead. And it was a cool talk, and it had fabulous slides because each time would show a picture like a new newspaper blow up, And I was,
Yeah.
he made a great talk. I mean, the slide where it was really cool. I was thinking I should have these slides, for financial talk because I could go, Citibank, because I had such a dull way of doing it. And then the idea that there's a journalist everywhere. And so cool things happen. Somebody takes a picture with their iPhone, which is the best video that you get of the earthquake situation in Chile and all that kind of stuff. And I think at a certain point at the high frequency, low level of information, closer to data kind of level, that's probably a pretty cool thing because you get a lot of coverage, you get a lot of stuff to work with, you do a lot of that. That doesn't mean that just everything out there randomly is going to turn out the most thoughtful piece about the whole situation with earthquakes, what's going on with the tectonic plates, where else might we expect to see them, how are different cities at risk or not, who is well prepared, all the rest of this stuff. This actually takes, resources and some scale and some budget and the ability to travel and connect the dots. So I think that fragmented journalism, in my own view, will make it harder for the profession to do the major dot connects. And to some extent, when you look at the history of this country, the thing like the Vietnam conflict stands out pretty starkly as a triumph for journalism where, and they spent a lot of money keeping those dots connected while it seeped into the American consciousness that maybe it was dumb to be over there. A lot of money, including lives lost and everything else. And some of the similar quote-unquote triumphs for journalism, which probably include the Watergate scandal and some of this kind of stuff, were triumphal reinforcements of the need to have a vigilant press that's free and open and somewhat institutional, because I just have trouble believing you might get a landslide thing against Vietnam with 4 billion people with iPhones that were all angry. You might. But the ones that took a little deeper look and nobody thought there was anything wrong under the covers until somebody was bold to go, I'm not sure I think, a couple 100 million people with iPhones necessarily turn up Watergate. So, I'm old-fashioned. I still buy a newspaper.
Yes, let's go to the front row of these two, and then we'll come over here.
So in journalism, are there any, to use the Watergate metaphor, are there any Bob Woodwards of the economy?
Are there any which?
Bob Woodwards of the economy.
Well, you could do stories. You could do stories of that ilk. For example, here's one. 4 young guys on Wall Street first got into business on Wall Street with a firm selling flaky tax shelters. And they all went on to be immensely powerful in economic matters. Their names were Alan Greenspan, who went on to be chairman of the Fed, Sandy Weill, who went on to run Citibank, Arthur Levitt, who went on to run the SEC and was there for the disassembly, as was Alan for the disassembly of Glass-Steagall, which was followed by Sandy's purchase of all the stuff that made the new Citibank. And the wiliest of the 4 to catch, but who has fingerprints like that, would be Frank Zarb, who actually ran NASD when I was there. There's a story.
So that hasn't been covered? Sorry.
What?
Has been written about? You're offering that for students to write the piece?
No, I'm just saying that kind of, if you're in the mood to look for characters that might be, that you could, put a big question mark by and say good guy or bad guy. But one of the things that gets in the way of good thinking is everybody is so attracted by a story like Madoff that they love it. It kind of has the throw the Christians to the lions, let's get here and watch them rip them up, this is going to be good, that guy, blah, 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 blah. And it's a perfect way to distract all you guys from where the real money got spilled. Well, Bernie took a couple $1 billion or something like that, so what? We're talking trillions here. Trillions. And but if you take the bait, and they're not above this, I have a lot of banker friends. I love Wall Street. I don't think you should hold it against them. If we have the rules such that they can do that, that's what they'll do. It's probably what we do. It's a regulation problem. It's not a morals problem, not an ethics problem. Actually, a lot of them need counseling. They've grown addicted. So do a lot of other people that have grown addicted to consumption and other things, But I don't think those stories connect to the causal problems as well. So it's probably just like a different style of journalism. Probably make a nice living and have a lot of fun, and it's probably kind of fun to do. Gotcha. You thought you were too important to be unaccountable, and I got you. That's probably fun. But the serious stuff that brings to the public a feeling that we're going to have a financial crisis before it happens instead of after it happens, that's going to have to be more analytic, more fact-based. And frankly, I think without some preservation of institutions of journalism, it's less likely to happen. Just one view.
Yes, you in the green sweater.
I actually have a follow-up question to exactly that. We were talking about how this fracturing of media outlets and sources has led to an undermining of these media institutions like those times that have traditionally been the source for investigative journalism, serious law-informed journalism. And I'm not going to ask you to philosophize broadly on how to save those institutions. But I do have a specific question, which is, what are your thoughts on taking publicly traded media companies and making them privately owned? Is that a viable option for keeping those institutions around and keeping that long-form investigative journalism around a bit longer?
I'd be surprised if it makes much difference, because the only difference is private is probably owned by a small number of people, or one, and public is owned by a larger number of people or more. It is to that wealthy private investors often take a longer term view than the street, than the pension funds and the other guys who are insisting that they're insisting on hypergrowth, insisting on increasing values in their stocks, insisting on having their retirement plans grow, and so that goes down through Wall Street and puts much shorter term pressure on them. So it might get a little difference if you went to the private side, but in the main, it's the critter that you create that has still got to get paid so it can pay what it needs. It's got to be coherent economically, and it's about the best you would get as a slight distinction in time scales. And it doesn't have to make massive profits, it just has to be sustainable. And it doesn't have to grow a lot. Everything doesn't have to grow. The ideal sewer system in a city is not a hypergrowth model. It only needs to grow enough to take care of the waste for a number of people that are in the city. In fact, the ideal system would be tightly coupled with this other driver, not just growth for growth's sake. So in that sense, correctly capitalized, I don't see some of these institutions as needing to be hyper growth more and more. No. They just have to be sustainable. But if they're not sustainable, then they're going to spend a lot of time begging for money, and be better if we could figure out how to make it a little bit sustainable. Some of the stuff we used to do with the post office to help the newspapers, some of the kinds of public policy you could have, could be applied here. But keep in mind, this government is broke. It's already worse. The debt ratio was than at any time in history for failed empires. So if everything else was going great, you could imagine the model, including doing some rational things about institutional journalism.
And one of the big questions I just want to point out, is interesting, as someone who's not in this field and has been trying to get to know it, that Ivana and Mike have been doing with other people, is to sort of rethink, from the fundamental ground up, what are the essential features of an economy that you really need, that you need to protect and get back to. And in some way, this upheaval in journalism is forcing us to do the same thing, to get back to core values, and no matter what the media is, what do you really, really need to maintain, and what
will other people take care of? Or,
yes, you've raised the issue of the internet and its inherent speed in moving economic transactions, for example. Some of us confronted a similar phenomenon when television started competing with print.
Yes.
Print and written media. And at the time you could say, well, what's voiced is hastily prepared and it's not easily remembered. If you have VCRs, now people have to have a VCR running all the time in order to remember what some news broadcast may have told them, or what he wants to remember was told them. But now with you've invoked the computer, now we have real haste going on with economic decisions, not just the political ones that we might have wanted to hear more precisely. And these are being done, you're now informed more than the speed of light, in effect, that these decisions on a large scale are being conducted. So I'm worried, are we really facing a true crisis? You faulted journalism for calling everything a crisis.
No, I didn't. They were crises. You guys nailed those. And if nobody's listening, and there's a fire in the hotel, sometimes you got to shout fire. And I don't hold that against journalism at all. I don't like some of the what do you call those things? You can always have about 6 versions of them when you go to London. You know, some of those headlines like, you know, 6-headed baby, blah, 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 blah. But tabloids, those guys, I personally, they don't ring my bell. But I don't mind the crisis headlines, so I wasn't following it. You make a very good point. So I'm just sort of wear a scientific hat. I don't know the first thing about journalism except what I read. The newspaper was a fairly closed system in certain ways. Had a finite number of reporters, had a finite number of what you call them stations, locations, had a certain subscription base, turned the crank, processed the stuff, out it came. While broadcast was an immense change in the delivery mechanism, it was still a largely closed system. TV station, you put the programming on, reporters take cameras with them. We still have to do some preparation. The nature of the pressure is a little different. You know, I'm going to read the evening news. I got an hour to get ready. Used to be, I got a deadline here. I screwed around. I didn't get on it. I got an hour and a half. Let's go, you know, get it done. I mean, there's similarities. The dislocational thing about the internet is that it is totally open. Totally open. And the way you make stuff flow around in it, if you're a software programmer, is by putting it in boxes. We actually call this containerization. So, for example, in your computer, there's a container called an operating system that runs across the chip. It's very good at pretty much getting stuff out of the chip, but if you can't do word processing, Excel, manage your pictures, so we have specialized containers called applications, which are too dumb to access the chip directly, but which can do specialized stuff pretty well. So they do separation of concerns, they limit the path complexity, they connect the containers, and computing it's called APIs. All the same principles that Glass-Steagall and the rest of that stuff represent. And what I'm saying about journalism is I think for order, there will have to be some kind of containerization, which comes down to some kind of institutionalization. But I don't know, I could be wrong, but I don't see how you get the time from how you report on and cover the big institutions without some institutional oomph on your own side. You know, the big companies, the big governments, these big institutions, you know. If this is like, you know, everybody show up with an iPhone, then you're going to have a riot before they listen, you know. And that's not going to be, what results from that's not going to be thoughtful, because it's going to have to be so emotionally laden before it happens that, you know, thought's already suspended. So I think I'm a big fan of figuring out how to do something about the institutions. I just don't know what it is in this environment.
Well, you've been exceedingly thoughtful and helpful and thought-provoking, so please join me in thanking